the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com. Expert insights on buying and selling farmland in Western Canada.
Welcome back to the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com, where we provide expert insights into the process of buying and selling farmland here in Western Canada. I'm Devon Davidson, your host and digital media strategist for CLHbid.com. And today we've got an exciting topic. We're going to be talking about irrigation and water rights and how they sell. And to help me with that conversation today, we've got with us Roy Carter, CEO of CLHbid.com. Roy, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Devon.
And also special guest, Bruce Warkentin, National Leader of Horticulture and Irrigation at MNP. Bruce, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Devon.
I understand it's your first podcast interview.
Yes, it is. I'm a long-time listener, first time on a podcast, so I'm excited to help you out here with an exciting topic here.
Love it. I'm really glad we could be your first shot at podcast.
Totally. Thanks for making the trip, Bruce.
Yeah, really appreciate it. I guess maybe let's just start a bit about yourself. Maybe provide a bit of background, who you are, what you do, and kind of your authority on the topic.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm here is there's been a lot of talk about productivity in Canada and how it's been lagging. And I believe irrigation plays a pivotal role in increasing our productivity in agriculture. And part of this is because when I was growing up in a little town called Vauxhall, about 1,000 people, I looked around and there was lush green fields of potatoes and sugar beets growing there, when a town not that far away called Retlaw was still dryland farming in that area.
Right.
So originally, as I understand the history of the area, Retlaw was supposed to be the center, but they changed their mind and it was Vauxhall. So you see the contrast between how irrigation has brought a significant influx of activity, water to that area, because as you know, Southern Alberta doesn't get a lot of regular water or precipitation. So growing up, it was my grandfather that immigrated here in around 1930s, and he was an irrigation farmer, and he grew sugar beets for many, many years. I helped him out on his farm. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, being part of irrigation and seeing how it has changed communities and how it can change different how farmers grow their crops. And I just had a passion for it. And as both of you know, farming, sometimes legacy isn't about the farming, it's about the people who work with farmers, whether it be advisors, whether it be lawyers and accountants and bankers and all that. Together, we collaborate into making our industry better and to increase the productivity of our land. And that's kind of why I'm here. I'm excited to be part of this conversation and to provide a little bit of background. My background circumvent through Calgary. I was doing finance stuff in Calgary. I got my CA, got my CBV, valuation, a bit of finance work I did there. And that background gives me a little bit of different perspective than a lot of accountants in the area, because I bring a different point of view. So when my clients come to me and say, what do you think about irrigation and what we need to do to make it better or more productive, I can provide that more business type of perspective to them. So my passion is helping the industry grow, and I think there's significant opportunity to grow in Canada.
Absolutely. And I guess just for some background too, as to how you're connected to CLH, you had written some information on a water rights sale we had down in the Bow Island area.
That's right.
Yeah.
Water rights is a very interesting and very specific topic for not a lot of area in Canada. And as National Leader of Irrigation and Horticulture, I try to lead that conversation in our firm, which has offices across Canada. And understanding how water rights are bought and sold and taxed and how we can expand our industry is critical. And working with advisors who know how these things are is critical in the success of any farm.
Yeah. Maybe just for the context of this conversation too, we should dive into some of the differences between irrigated farmland and dryland, technical and risks associated with each.
So going back to early days of irrigation, Captain John Palliser named the Palliser Triangle, which is a land formation which is mainly in southern Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, and southern Manitoba. It's an area he called uninhabitable. And he said that because the precipitation didn't come at a regular interval. It came in the spring and maybe in the fall, and it just ran over the land, and you couldn't really plan to grow crops because the water didn't come at the right time.
Right.
So that history started over 100 years ago, and the infrastructure involved in irrigation has being built since then. And it's been a collaboration between government, farmers, and all industry participants in a very collaborative approach to build an irrigation system. So I'm speaking specifically about Southern Alberta because Southern Alberta is a different type of organizational structure because we're structured in 13 irrigation districts, which is opposed to a private ownership of water rights in other areas. So in contrast, if you own your water rights privately, you take the water out of the river and you store it and you manage it. Whereas in an irrigation district, they provide the conveyance and the irrigation system to get it to the edge of your land, and then you get to use it. You have the pleasure of using it. So the costs associated with the private is a little bit more unknown, whereas the irrigation districts have a little bit more ability to predict what the costs are going to be from year to year, which I think is a big value add in irrigation districts.
Yeah. And so how would you say that water rights and water infrastructure affects the value of irrigated land?
Now, when somebody's not familiar with irrigation land, they go and they look at, let's say, FCC land report or something like that, and they see this little asterisk that says irrigation land in Southern Alberta is growing for a significant amount of money more than other land. Yep. And there's two main reasons why. And coming from a valuation background, to value anything, you need to have cash flow and a required rate of return. Right. And it's a mathematical calculation. You take the cash flow, you divide it by the required rate of return, and you get the value. So to drive the value of irrigation land to where it is, the cash flow from the land needs to be a lot higher, which is driven by different crops that are grown, different agronomy practices, different customers, and different processing, different ancillary industries that have been developed. So you see there's a significant amount of more cash being created per acre on an irrigated piece of land. But I think one of the things that most people don't understand is the other part of that, in that irrigation provides the risk is a lot lower in your cash flow. So you have a drought in other areas, your cash flow is a lot lower. Whereas irrigation, we have the ability to manage where water is stored and applied. You have a lot less volatility. So when you have less volatility, banks are happier. Right. Banks can lend more money, which means it's usually cheaper than equity. Their risk premiums on their debt of the irrigated farmer is lower because they're more likely to get paid back. And also, there's a lot more equity participants in the market. So you'll see pension funds, you'll see financial players participating in the market. And when you have more people in the market, you have a lower expected rate of return on equity. So all those things combined result in a lot higher value for irrigated land.
Okay, so definitely higher value. But with that, probably higher costs too, right, associated with the infrastructure. Maybe talk a little bit about how that's unique to irrigated farmland.
So irrigated farmland, if you look at it, it's not the same as just taking regular farmland crops and adding water. I think that we have to make sure there's a distinct difference between those two. Because if you just take wheat and oilseeds mix and add water, you'll get better yields, but you'll probably not get enough return to justify the investment, because the investment is significant to build a reservoir. If you see how the size of the reservoirs the Bassano Dam has created in upstream, those are not $1 million projects; those are $1 billion projects. Right. So to justify the added cost, there needs to be more upside to having the irrigation land for sure.
Okay, I think talking about inputs there, and obviously Bruce's background on a CBV business and that is where a lot of that value comes there with clients. What I hear with the dryland people, they're because of the risk, they're not willing to put the full inputs to maximize the highest yield because they just don't know if they're going to get the rain. So some of them will try and do, top dressing of nitrogen and basically increase the inputs during the growing season, having a regard to where the crop's at. Mm-hmm. But obviously a lot of Bruce's clients where they can turn on water with their iPhone, they don't have to get into that input scenario where do I spend it or not. Right. They know they can get the input returned. Does that make sense, Bruce?
Exactly. And it's about it's that last acre that you need to get productivity from. So if you're familiar with the irrigation pivots, you can't do the square of 160 acres. You can do 130, 135, maybe a bit more with the corner arm. But it's that 1 or 2 extra acres that you're going to get the being productive, whether it's a low point in the field or a part of the land that you need to have a little bit more TLC to. That yields a significant change in your return on investment on that particular field because it costs so much to buy each acre. You need to make sure each acre is productive to its capacity, its highest and best use, as we call it.
Yeah. Okay.
Changing gears a little bit, where do you see growth opportunities in Western Canada for irrigated farmland, and what conditions favor that expansion?
So there's a few reports out there that I read. Omnigen's Asset Management put out a report recently saying that they forecasted that there's a potential to increase irrigated land by 400% in Canada, and that's a significant amount. Of course, that is a hopeful goal. A realistic goal would be somewhere between what we have now and that number, right? And there would be significant opportunity across the Palliser Triangle. And the reason I say the Palliser Triangle and not all of Western Canada is because that area has the weakness of having not reliable moisture at the right time. It's coming in the spring and the fall more with more weather events. As you see, there's down south, there's floods and these things that are happening more often. And in order to capture that water, we need reservoir systems to do that. And once you have the water in the reservoir, you can manage it and put it on the land when you need it. And you can grow optimal crops at that point. So having the ability to manage that water is critical in being able to grow irrigation. Maybe your question also is, what are some of the reasons, the things that will stop the development of irrigation?
Yes.
And some of it is about education. And I'm a big firm believer in educating the public about irrigating more water. You'll see news articles about there's drought and shortage of water and why are we expanding acres? We're expanding acres in the south. And why are we doing that? Now, it comes back to technology. If you look at the history of our irrigation system, we went from flood irrigation. If you're familiar with flood, it's you just have a shovel and you put a boundary here and the water goes on the field and then it flows down to the crops. And it wasn't very consistent because at the top you get more, at the bottom it would pool and you'd have alkaline pieces and stuff like that. Yeah. So we went from a place where we were doing a lot of flood irrigation to, if you remember those wheel move. We had those wheel move where you go every 8 hours and you turn them and there's still a few of those around. And we also I used to do hand move. They didn't have the wheels. You had to get out there and pick them up a hand and hook them up again. And you do that every few hours. Yeah. So it was a little bit more inefficient than currently we have pivots. And like Roy, you mentioned, all these farmers can hit their iPhone and put a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch or whatever it was required. Yeah. But the other thing is, the history of pivots was that you just applied the same amount all across the field.
Right.
We have the technology now to apply. It can sense where the water is needed. The higher points need more, the lower points need less, and you're going to get optimal growing experience in any piece of that land. So it's not a matter of just hitting the button and it starts to supply water.
Right.
It's sensing with artificial intelligence, the technology is there, that it can sense where the water is needed.
Do you see AI being a larger part of the technology associated with it moving forward? That's just a buzzword that everybody seems to talk about right now.
Well, I believe that as irrigators, we need to obtain the social license to expand in a sustainable and reasonable way, and not like we were talking about before, not just taking more water out of the river. society thinks that by expanding it just means more.
Right.
It doesn't mean more. It means the same and using it better.
Right.
And part of that is technology. And if you look at a low flow irrigation pivot using artificial intelligence compared to flood irrigation,
Right.
which is still used a lot around the world, and even these other forms of irrigation, they're significantly more efficient. And what we call the turnout, the water that goes through the system and out back into the river, is seen as inefficient. If we can use that more efficiently, we can expand our acres. And you'll see that over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, a lot more acres are being irrigated with similar amount of water, and they track this. I mean, each irrigation district has a self-governing board that decides in a sustainable way how much water they can use and how much is in the reservoir, and each farmer can use that amount to grow their crops. And it's a very sustainable model where they look at how much we can grow, and by implementing things like pipelines. So instead of having, when I was a kid, they had these ditches. Well, they still have a few ditches, but they have ditches where you go swimming in. Unfortunately, they're all disappearing because they're all turning into pipelines where it has no seepage, no evaporation, and all the water goes right from the main canal through the pipeline to the pivot and out the pivot onto the plants.
Right.
And how much waste is there?
Very little.
Very little waste.
Interesting.
Because even in California and other places, you have these open ditches and it's 45 degrees. How much are you losing to evaporation?
Of course.
So I believe that the irrigation districts and people who are irrigators know that there's only a certain amount of water we have. And with droughts and all, it's very important to use every drop wisely in terms of using it to grow crops in our area.
Right.
What I found interesting as we got to know the area and just obviously don't know it nearly like Bruce does down there, but what I find quite amazing is the irrigation often is on can be 4 or 5 CLI soil. So it can actually take soil that we would generally consider as sort of marginal. And CLHbid did sell for the province 4 or 5 years ago, some by Tabor that was like a 5 soil and pretty hard to grow grain on. But you add water to it and it's amazing what can happen. You don't need the real high-end soils, the 1 or 2 that you might find at Bentley, Alberta or someplace to really get these big crops. And from what we hear, and again, Bruce knows way better than us, but the potato guys and that almost like the lighter soil, sandier, and throw water to it, and it gives you all kinds of cropping options.
That's exactly right, Roy. And I go back to a few years ago when there was this arbitrary reduction in inputs that the government put in. Our farmers don't want to put more than they need to. They put the optimal amount. And part of it is using agronomists, whether they have the knowledge in the farm themselves or they hire agronomists. Agronomy is key to growing these different crops, sugar beets, potatoes, any manner of other types of specialty crops. It's about raising the bar in how these farmers understand different cropping. And each crop has a lot of different way of growing too, and storing. And it's just a different way of farming. It's not that, like I said before, take other crops and add water. It's about changing the aspect of what you're growing and building the infrastructure around it. And some of the ancillary industries that develop too. If you were down in Lethbridge area, you've got the feedlot industry, which is only there because we have a reliable source of feed. Forage is grown in our area, and we have irrigation, so it can develop there because in a drought year, you're still going to get the forage to feed to the cattle. Yeah. And you have the potato processors. There's a reason they're there because they have a reliable source of potatoes to process. And we'll go back to, I don't want to just focus just on Southern Alberta, but in order to develop an irrigation area, it's a collaborative effort amongst more than just one farm. Because one farm applying water to just their land is great because it helps their yields, but creating the infrastructure to develop ancillary industries, secondary industries, that's how you get more value per acre.
That's interesting.
I actually wanted to go back to your point about expansion. So you'd mentioned potentially 400% expansion over, I can't remember the time frame you mentioned, but what percentage of that would you say takes place in Saskatchewan? Because just being from Saskatoon, I hear about the irrigation projects, potential projects down south all the time. But where is that at? Where do you see that going?
So part of I follow the Saskatchewan projects quite closely over the years, and they have had some stop and go kind of things that have happened along the way.
Yeah.
Speaking proactively about it, I believe there's definitely an opportunity there, because if you look at where potato growers are, they are in southern Alberta, they're in southern Manitoba, and there's not a whole lot in between there.
Right.
So the land is similar. And I'm speaking from an accounting business advisor, not an agronomist and all that.
Sure.
So there's other factors like infrastructure, like processing, like other things. But the ability to use irrigation in a responsible and sustainable way, there's opportunity there. The other thing to remember is we've had 120 years of history here. We've developed, like I said, from flood all the way to where we are now. What Saskatchewan has the ability to do right now, if they wanted to, and in other areas of Alberta and Manitoba, is use the technology we've developed or helped develop and start there. Wouldn't it be great to start at step 8 instead of step 1?
Of course. Yeah.
And just the way the investments that's been made, and there has some debate over whether return on investments there and that sort of thing. And I guess what I would say is, math people can cut the numbers many different ways, but at the end of the day, if Alberta's investing a lot into the infrastructure of irrigation, there must be some upside to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is taxation issues specific to irrigated farmland and purchase price allocations. So, if someone purchases a parcel of land and it has water rights and it's got irrigation infrastructure and all these types of things, how should the purchase price be allocated between those?
So one of the pitfalls I see a lot of the time is that individuals who may or may not know irrigation that well, they allocate everything to land.
Okay.
So land, as we all know, is not deductible. It's a real property. It's a fixed asset. It doesn't deplete in value. It's going to be the same from now until forever. So, but there's stuff on there. There's things like irrigation equipment, like the pivot. Like there's storage equipment, like potato storages. There's buildings. There's pipelines. There's standing crop, and the last thing would be water rights. So as a taxpayer, somebody who's buying farmland, you are obligated to do a proper purchase price allocation of what you bought, same with the seller. So in this case, justifying a high value for the depreciable assets as opposed to the real property provides something we call tax shield. A tax shield is something that helps a purchaser reduce the cost of that purchase because they can deduct it. So in this case, water rights, before, we wouldn't deduct anything for it, but now we have justification of what the value of these depreciable assets are, so they can go into a separate pool and actually become depreciable. And if you know farming, the name of the game is pushing your tax liability into the future. Now, I'm not an advocate to never pay tax. That's not. I believe there's a good reason to pay tax, and there's some good tax advisors out there that all of our farmer clients should talk to. But if I can push this liability into my future life or into my kids' future life, the time value of money gets very powerful very quickly.
Okay. What are some of the common pitfalls you've seen with purchase price allocation? Anything that listeners should be aware of?
So, like I said, Revenue Canada has an obligation for all taxpayers to do a reasonable effort. So what's a reasonable effort is getting information on what these assets would buy and sell for. This is why I'm kind of excited about the CLHbid selling those water rights recently. It provides support for an open and unrestricted market. Up until now, there were water rights issued for 4,000, and that was what some people would consider an open, unrestricted market, but in my opinion, it would be more like a restricted market because there were only certain people who could buy it. This, anybody could buy. It was open and unrestricted. So you tested what people would actually pay for it.
Yeah.
And that's exciting for me because then you can take the value of land and derive the value of everything else and come up with a reasonable allocation for all these depreciable assets, which, like I said, has a pretty powerful tax shield component, because when you can deduct at 5% declining balance, it adds up at the prices we're paying.
Roy, do you want to expand on that at all, the water rights sale?
Sure.
Just for our listeners, for context.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough. We sold for two parties. The town of Taber did an RFP requesting proposals to sell. Allie, my daughter, who's a lawyer in the office, did a proposal. We were fortunate enough to get it. Following that, I believe it was about for 170 acres. Following that, we had an individual farmer that saw it and they approached us. And as a law firm, we have a duty to go to that first client first to avoid a conflict. But we saw economies of scale there of putting the two together, and should have probably called Bruce with his CBV, but we might have got a bill. But he probably would have saw the value there too. They were bid out separately, so people could, if you just needed 70 acres or 90, you could have bid on the one or 170. But having said that, they were both with our universal close. I believe the average was over $15,000 an acre. And they came within pennies of each other, which to me shows the market works there too. One could, money could move from parcel A to parcel B, one or two, and that. It seems like it was a totally open market working. I view it a bit. It's quite similar to a bit like quotas with supply management and these barns and that. You got the barn, but you need to add the quota to it, just like water to the land.
Right.
And, some of these quotas don't freely trade in either. They kind of have their own exchanges. But I suspect you might even see that going into quotas, whether it be milk quotas and that type of deal, where the market sort of trades freely and determines the price, and you get proper allocation for the asset.
Yeah, I totally agree, Roy. What I'm excited about related to this specific, it shows that a town of Taber or somebody who has extra water rights. So as I said, with a acre of or a quarter of land, you might have some extra water rights that you aren't using. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not providing any benefit to the economy because they're just sitting there. You're not using them. Town of Taber probably wasn't using them to their full, highest and best use. So now the town of Taber got the proceeds from these individuals. They're going to reinvest it in infrastructure and build the economy, I would assume. That capital is being, latent capital is being reinvested. And the individuals who bought the water rights they paid a lot of money for them. Are they going to let them sit around and do nothing? They're going to use them for their highest and best use. Mm-hmm. So this is where I love where a market develops, because it can redistribute assets to the people who value them the most. So if somebody needs to have water rights to grow their crops, they're going to find somebody who isn't using them or needs to redeploy that capital. And this is the other exciting thing about somebody. It's not that this farm over here isn't growing and isn't being successful, but maybe they could use that capital to reinvest in something else, like technology, like drones, like all kinds of different types of things that the overall economy needs, but we're just sitting there not being used.
Right.
Going back to productivity, this is easy productivity gains where we can redeploy capital to higher and better use assets.
Yeah, it was interesting. Afterwards, I talked to the buyer. He wasn't happy about the price, but he was happy he got it. And he felt comfortable with what he could do with it. And he also felt comfortable that he didn't overpay vis-a-vis the market. He knew he bought at the market. It was quite an interesting call with him that, I thought I could get it cheaper than that, but at least I knew I was at the market. I was one click more than somebody else, right?
Right.
And obviously they're not going to sit.
Yeah.
He's going to work to pay him off.
I just want to take a second too, for anyone that's maybe not familiar, can you maybe explain what water rights are legally, or the definition of them, and maybe how they differ from other sorts of property rights?
Well, this is interesting. Speaking to a bunch, Roy's a lawyer, and a bunch of lawyers here. I am not a legal junkie or anything.
Fair enough.
But there, in my opinion, not my opinion, but the way Alberta is structured is there's two types of water rights. There's like, is it the private ones, which you can get water right out of the watershed yourself, or there's the irrigation where you're buying water rights in the irrigation district.
Right.
And the difference is the irrigation district determines how you use them.
Right.
But you can buy them, you know how much they cost because you buy them with the land usually, or there has been some expansion, you know what the costs are to buy them in this market that was created. It's a fixed cost. And at that point, once you have those water rights, you have the right to use that water from then on. And you pay a conveyance charge each year after that as well. But the certainty of the cost is where I think it improves our ability to grow, because when certainty meets innovation, you have the ability to borrow money or get investors to be in, because they don't want to see this. They want to see this. Right. They would rather see a good, reasonable return for their money than to 1 year lose money and the next year make a lot of money. So volatility allows us to access capital, which allows us to increase productivity.
Okay. And how do they differ from land rights in terms of transferability or any of those sort of considerations?
Well, when you're buying inside an irrigation district, as long as you meet the requirements of the irrigation district, so of course you can't sell water rights from one irrigation district and have them in a different one, because they physically can't move the water from one to another. Right. So there is some limitations around that. There's also, we've seen in some of these drought years that the irrigation district, which is self-governed by farmers themselves, they also sometimes have to limit their amount of inches that they get. So there are some limitations there too, not unlike if you had a private license where you're limited to what you can take out of the river or the lake or whatever as well.
Okay.
But they're not tied to the surface title like a mineral title, say.
Okay.
Water rights, as Bruce talked about, they're movable within that district, subject to certain conditions.
Right.
And then from a taxation standpoint, how are they taxed? How do income and capital gains taxes apply to water rights?
So this has gotten a lot more relevant to what we do because the values have gone up so much.
Right.
So not to get too technical, but it's a class 14.1, which is a depreciable asset at 5% declining balance, similar to what other farmers would buy tractors and that sort of thing would be different classes. It's treated exactly like that. So let's say you bought water rights for $15,000 and you deducted it over time, and then in the future you sold it for $13,000. Well, you wouldn't have recapture, or you would have the ability to deduct the difference. But if you bought for $15,000, you sold for $17,000, there could be some capital gain. Okay. But the benefit of a growing farm who's buying water rights is that as you add more to the pool, it's less likely for it to go negative. And when it goes negative, then you start having recapture. So in most cases, as long as you can sell land and buy others and offset it, like kind of like replacement property, but you can defer, like I said, defer tax as far into the future as you can with using class 14.1.
Do you want to just expand quickly on recapture, just for our listeners?
So I'll use my example again. You buy for $15,000, you deduct down to $13,000. But you sell for $15,000 again. You've deducted the difference to $2,000. So when you sell for $15,000, you have $2,000 of recapture.
Okay.
So you can't have your deduction and your cake and eat it too. Once you have the deduction, you sell it, you have to have recapture it back.
Gotcha. Are there any risks associated with ownership of water rights, whether it's regulatory, overusage?
So when you look at our system of water rights and our water management systems in Canada versus other places, and I listen to a lot of other places where drought is very much a problem, oversubscription of water rights, overuse. There's a lot of people arguing over who gets what and first use and all that kind of thing. I believe Canada's and Alberta's specifically water usage has been managed more responsibly. There's not as much being pulled out of the river as they're not oversubscribed like they are. And if you look at these self-governing bodies, they do a very good job of watching forecasts. They look at the snowpack, they look at all this. And keep in mind that the water in Alberta is not from aquifers, it's not from groundwater. We're not getting it from wells. We're not sucking it deeper and deeper into the ground, like some places around the world where eventually you suck down to the bottom and there's nothing left. This is surface water. So we know how much is coming over the mountains. We know how much is in the reservoirs. So we know how much we can use.
Right.
And so it's a matter of managing, okay, this is how much is in the reservoir, this is how much we can use this year. Sometimes we get a little bit more rain than other years, and that's kind of helped keep more in the reservoir. But the key is that the system is sustainable because it's the water that comes surface water.
Okay. I think you sort of alluded to it already, but do you want to talk about the potential benefits of having a market for water rights, just, capital investment and optimizing?
So I think the biggest benefit of having a market is to determine an arm's length, an open, unrestricted price. And that helps redeploy capital in the marketplace. Because if I'm sitting there with 10 extra water rights, let's say, and I need to put a down payment on a tractor or something like that, and I'm not using them, and now I can sell them for $15,000 a piece if I just choose to do that, then I can redeploy that capital in something that will make me money, whereas this is just sitting idle. And that is the main thing, is increasing productivity of everything and getting to the individuals and the farmers who are using it for the highest, best use. Because eventually a market that develops moves the asset to the people who will use it the most. That's how price and supply and demand works. Yeah. The second benefit is a taxation benefit, in that you can justify a higher deduction using Class 14.1, and Revenue Canada requires sufficient evidence to show what things are worth. It's not just putting your thumb up there and guessing. It's actually got some evidence what it's worth, and it's legitimate, and it helps. The tax shield helps farmers invest more of their money back in the farm. So I know there's this joke that farmers never pay tax, but they use that money to reinvest. It creates jobs, economic growth. Right. So I believe that the way that taxation works for farmers, it helps the overall economy, helps agri-processing, and the more money that gets reinvested, it just helps the economy grow. And those are the two main reasons why I think that a market that's developed helps both buyer and seller, because it's just a way of redeploying a capital. And like I said, I'm big on productivity gains and not quick wins, but wins in my lifetime. I like to see progress, and I've seen a lot of progress from when I was a kid to now, and I would love to see more.
One thing we want to talk about too here is there a trend you're seeing where farmers are divesting themselves of poor land and then trying to purchase better land and optimizing margins? Roy, I think you had an example about a farmer out in Manitoba somewhere where he was trying to get rid of some poor land, and he talked about potentially looking at some irrigation infrastructure. And
you got a good memory.
Yeah,
I had a call from a fellow last week, and he was looking at selling one of what he called the more marginal quarter, which probably a lot of us would like to have, southern Manitoba, nice stuff. But he was actually kind of what Bruce is talking about, looking to deploy that capital into building his own dam and then irrigating the balance. Mm-hmm. So just exactly what Bruce was talking about, reallocation of capital. He had a quarter that it wasn't able to irrigate, and had some issues with salinity and that. Thought he'd dispose of it, and then roughly his cost to build his dam, he was telling me, was $1 million. But he had the permits. And again, what Bruce talks about, in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, you see more of that private stuff, similar to northern Alberta, Lacrete, where you're starting to see some private permits going to the Peace River, lagoons, and that type of deal. Yeah.
Bruce, would you say, is that a trend you're noticing as well?
Yeah, in our area, there are farmers who sell and buy replacement property other areas, and redeploy what they sell for, and it goes to how you maximize profit on each acre. So individuals who have higher margin crops are generally going to be the ones buying at the higher price. Right. And then individuals who may or may not be growing similar crops may see opportunities elsewhere. So we see a trend from southern Alberta to Saskatchewan, or from southern Alberta to central and northern Alberta. And it's different. It's a different farming mentality. I had a client who said to me, and this goes back to the differences between irrigation and other areas, is I can grow a whole quarter of rhubarb, but who's going to eat it? So it goes to the fact that we can grow lots of stuff. We have the ability to, but it also has to go hand in hand with creating a market for it, a customer that needs what we're producing. And that's where you see, kind of like Silicon Valley in southern Alberta, where a lot of different ideas and entrepreneurs and processors and are coming together in one area. And it doesn't have to be southern Alberta. It could be southern Saskatchewan. It could be other areas, southern Manitoba. But it has to be this hub mentality where if you get economies of scale, you get a lot of people on board, you're going to get processors coming into the area, because then they go, well, I can reliably source fresh peas or corn or any manner of crop. Unless you can reliably source it, they're not going to spend, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars building a processing facility. And that's how you get top dollar for your crop, is growing the crops and processing them locally and then selling them to customers.
Okay. For farmers that are looking at investing in their own private infrastructure, are there tax considerations that they should be aware of, or risk associated with that? I know you kind of talked about the cost certainty and things like that, but
definitely it's there's a lot of money to invest in it. And I think it's definitely a good investment, as if you run your numbers and you make sure, like I said, irrigation success is not crops plus water equals success. It's got to be different than that. You have to look at it differently. And you could get a return. I'm not saying it wouldn't help, but it needs to go hand in hand with changing what crops are growing and what secondary industries are developing in the area, like feedlots and hybrid canola and all these other processing plants.
Yeah. Are there any policies that would help make this easier or less risky to invest in infrastructure?
Interesting question, Devon. The last few years, we had this special policy where we could deduct $1.5 million of capital additions to spur on the economy, because we went through a little bit of a hiccup there. Yeah. And that really, I saw, helped farmers invest in new technology, new tractors, new combines, the new even pivots they could buy with this 1.5 million. And they really doubled down and they invested in it. That's coming to an end, or it has come to an end. So I think government could change tax policy to encourage that type of thing. I'm a small government kind of a person. I would rather have the private industry invest than do grants and things like that, because I don't think that necessarily helps as much as providing the right incentive for private money to be invested. So changing tax rates and deductions provides some incentive to do that. There's also SHRED, scientific research and development credits that are out there. I think it's an underused area in agriculture that probably should be more open to more farming activity. And then, of course, there's grants available too. You see a lot of different grants for developing water resources and stuff. Of course, I'm not going to say no if the grant's available, and everybody should talk to their advisor and make sure they're aware that these grants are there. And the grants aren't there just as handouts, because if you think about it, if the government's giving you money to change your pivot from an old one to a new one, and there's less water being used more efficiently, then it's a win-win for everybody.
Okay. If you're advising a farmer planning for the next 5 to 10 years, what should they keep an eye on when it comes to irrigated land, water rights, taxation, land portfolio optimization, anything like that?
I'm really bullish, or I'm really positive about what irrigation can do in Canada. And I think that with changing weather patterns, changing how I listen to a lot of different podcasts and forecasters and things like that. And everybody has said that in our area, in Western Canada, we're going to see more precipitation in in the shoulder seasons, in the spring and in the fall, but not in the summer time, in July and August when the crops are all growing. So what's perfect is irrigation then, because you store it when you're getting it, and you can apply it when you need it. So I believe that there's a lot of upside potential still, a lot of tailwinds for irrigation in our area, and it's about developing more than just. It's developing the ideas and the entrepreneurs that in the farmers that have the the ability to grow these different crops.
Right.
But also having the individuals who process those to come alongside. It's a collaborative effort to build an irrigation industry.
What would you say are the biggest downside risks to the future of irrigation?
Well, I think the biggest downside is if we don't educate the public in terms of water usage, because I believe that urban people have a different opinion of how we use water, and I believe it has more to do with social media and maybe other countries, because I think a lot of people look at things that are happening in the States, things that are happening in between Texas and Mexico and things like that, and they attribute those problems to our area, and then that's the truth to them. And I think it's a matter of the irrigation industry, all of us, advisors and farmers and everybody, saying, you know what, we live here, we work here, we want this to be successful. We're not mining this out of here. This is going to be sustainable from now on. And there is this mentality that we're just trying to get what we can for the short amount of time and then get out. Right. It's not how it is. Irrigation farmers, just like other farmers, are there for the generations. They want their farms to pass down to the next generation. They want to do better. They want their land to be better than it was before. You see things like cover cropping. You see things like more organic type of application, less chemical and fertilizer use. We're trying. The industry is trying to do things better, and I think that is teaching customers or people that are going to buy the produce is critical, because they're the ones who, if there's nobody going to buy the stuff, then there's nothing to produce, right?
Yeah. Would you say there's any opportunities that are currently being underappreciated right now, whether that's new technology or investments in infrastructure?
I think when people look at farming, they wrap it all in one bow and call it the same risk.
Right.
I think you need to understand when you talk about irrigation that there's a lot of risk mitigation with irrigation, and the risks associated with owning irrigated land are a lot lower because of the droughts. There's no drought anymore because you can apply water when you need to. You do grow different crops. You have higher margins. You have a lot of the risks associated with farming with water or irrigation are mitigated significantly. And when you look at the price versus price elsewhere, a lot of people might look at it and go, well, why would I buy there versus somewhere else? But you get what you pay for. And I think a lot of people will be surprised how stable that has made a lot of cash flow in the area. And that has rippling effects to lower crop insurance premiums, because, I mean, with lower ups and downs, you have lower risk, lower interest rate costs, because the bank knows that, it's pretty stable. And there's a lot of ability to pay higher dollars because you have a lot less risk.
Last question here. Sort of what gives you optimism or concern for the future of irrigation and high quality land utilization in Canada?
Well, I don't really have too many concerns. I'm pretty optimistic. I think it comes down to really four main things. And the first one is attracting entrepreneurs. There's a lot of talk about farm transition, right, in Canada. Yeah. There's 180,000 farms, and they're all older, and they're all, I didn't mean to point at you, Roy. And they're all they don't have a transition plan.
Right. Yeah, we've had entire episodes around that. Hey,
in my opinion, in the irrigation, we have a bit of younger profile in our area, because in order to adopt all these new technologies and stuff, sometimes you got to be a little younger. And I see a lot of multiple generations working together in our area to do that. And attracting the next generation to be excited about farming is about providing new and different ideas, new different crops. Right. you see a smiling guy's face when he's like, I just tried growing this year and it worked out really well. I mean, we were growing garlic and mint and all kinds of different things. Sometimes it's a matter of just trying something out and seeing if you can build a market, especially if you're paying that much for land.
Yeah.
Ideas are super important. Implementation. I mean, I've seen some really cool things like laser weed removal systems, things of Star Wars in my opinion. But I saw these things arriving on fields where they're just zapping out the weeds.
Yeah.
Think of the benefit of that. No, you don't have to apply as much chemical, and chemical it also hurts the crop too when you apply chemical. So you have increased yield, you have lower input and chemical costs, and also I'd rather eat something that doesn't have a whole bunch of chemical on it. Of course. So investment in technology like that is critical for the future of irrigation. And then developing customers, whether it be, I've seen people develop their own online customer base where they're trying to do deliveries and stuff, things like that. But to grow economies of scale, it's about attracting the processors and being able to promise them that we can produce this much produce each year so they can build a factory and have a bunch of risk associated with that. They need to have the reliable produce to process. And then finally, capital. Capital, as Roy and Devon, you've seen the price of land in southern Alberta has just skyrocketed. And capital is needed, whether it's in the form of debt or in the form of equity. It is the pinch point of the growth in our area. And I believe that providing more context to financial institutions, to investors, the more people to the party, the more we can collaborate and make irrigation grow even more.
Excellent.
Yeah, the industry's lucky to have somebody like Bruce as a leader and forefront in it.
Well, and we were very fortunate to have you here today, Bruce. I appreciate your time.
I hope you learned something.
Oh,
I know I
absolutely.
learned lots from following you on CLHbid, and I'm excited about future offerings and just us working together as advisors, as farmers. I think it's a good thing that we're providing to the market, and we all can't be farmers, so let's do the best we can with what we got.
Totally. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, thanks
Thanks,
a lot,
Roy.
guys.
Thanks, Devon.
Appreciate it. That's going to do it for another episode of the Farmland Exchange. Thank you for tuning in. It's very much appreciated. If you haven't already, please take a minute to like, rate, and review the podcast. As I said, those 5-star reviews really help us, and we appreciate that support. If you have any questions or there's topics you want us to cover, or if you're interested in selling farmland yourself and you want to have that conversation with us, please send us an email, info@clhbid.com, or give us a call, 866-263-7480. All of the information about this podcast is on the website as well at clhbid.com/Farmland Exchange. That's it for now. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this has been a positive exchange for you. Take care.